Welcome back to Unintended Consequences, Episode 70, for July 26th, 2026. We're looking at a case today where the people involved were doing their best with the information they had. Reformers ended cash bail to free the poor before trial, and found that removing one flawed tool requires designing what comes next. In January 2020, a man arrested in New York City on a low-level drug charge walked out of court without posting bail under the state's new reform law. Weeks later, he was rearrested on a more serious allegation. That case became one of several that entered political debate almost immediately. The reform had been written to keep people who had not been convicted from losing jobs and housing simply because they lacked cash. Instead, it surfaced the harder question of how any system decides who must wait for trial and who does not. For decades, observers across the political spectrum had documented the same basic problem. Defendants too poor to post even modest bail remained in jail for weeks or months on misdemeanor or nonviolent felony charges, while wealthier defendants went home. Khalif Browder's 3-year detention on Rikers Island for allegedly stealing a backpack became a widely cited example of the human cost. Advocates, defense attorneys, and some prosecutors argued that pretrial detention should turn on flight risk or danger to the community, not on the size of a defendant's bank account. In the years after the 2008 financial crisis, when jail populations remained high despite falling crime rates in many cities, this equity argument gained traction among both liberal reformers and some fiscal conservatives concerned about the cost of local jails. The underlying assumption was straightforward. If objective risk tools replaced cash, fewer low-risk people would be detained and overall public safety would not suffer. A defendant earning roughly minimum wage might need 2 weeks of take-home pay to cover a $500 bond. That arithmetic made release impossible for many, even when judges viewed the charge as minor. New Jersey moved first. After voters approved a constitutional amendment in 2014, the state implemented a risk assessment system in 2017 that sharply reduced the use of cash bail. Within 2 years, the pretrial jail population had dropped by roughly 40%, according to state monitoring reports. New York followed with legislation effective January 1st, 2020, that eliminated cash bail for most misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies, and required judges to use the least restrictive conditions. Early data from New Jersey showed high appearance rates and no immediate statewide crime surge, which supporters cited as evidence the approach could work. Skeptics, including some police unions and district attorneys, warned that the new rules remove judicial discretion in cases where a defendant's history suggested elevated risk even if the current charge was minor. In New Jersey, the risk instrument weighed factors such as prior convictions, employment stability, and residential ties. The state also funded additional pretrial services staff, though the expansion took time to staff fully. Once New York's law took effect, several high-profile rearrests of released defendants received sustained media attention and prompted legislative pushback within months. The state responded by amending the statute in 2020 and again in 2022, restoring judicial discretion for more offenses and allowing prosecutors to argue for detention on additional grounds. Measuring the broader effect proved difficult. The reforms coincided with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, which altered policing, court operations, and crime patterns across the country. Researchers at the Rand Corporation and elsewhere noted that isolating the impact of bail changes from these larger shocks required careful statistical controls that not every study applied. In New Jersey, some counties reported increases in certain offenses among released defendants, while statewide violent crime trends remained mixed. The causal mechanism most often discussed was the absence of a fully developed alternative to detention. Risk assessment instruments improved consistency but could not create new community supervision capacity overnight, and judges sometimes lacked intermediate options between release and jail. Third-order effects included strained pretrial services budgets, renewed political pressure on prosecutors to seek detention in marginal cases, and public confusion over which charges still required bail. Supporters pointed to studies showing that overall rearrest rates did not rise dramatically in the first year, while critics highlighted specific repeat offense incidents and argued that aggregate statistics masked localized costs. New York's repeated statutory adjustments illustrate the most common response: incremental redesign rather than outright reversal. New Jersey has retained its core framework but continues to refine the risk tool and expand supervision programs. In both states, the conversation has shifted from cash bail versus no cash bail to questions of data infrastructure, funding for pretrial services, and how to handle defendants with repeated low-level arrests. Where new monitoring programs were funded, appearance rates stayed high. Where they were not, judges reverted to detention more often, even under the revised statutes. Any policy that removes a visible lever must specify what will occupy the space it leaves. Otherwise, the system will improvise under pressure. Risk tools and release conditions are not self-executing. They require ongoing investment in supervision capacity and timely data feedback. When outcomes are measured only after political controversy erupts, adjustments become reactive rather than iterative. The bail reform experience therefore raises a standing question for other complex systems. What observable indicators will tell us, early and reliably, whether the replacement mechanism is performing as intended? That question applies equally to changes in housing regulation, environmental permitting, or school discipline policy, where removing one imperfect control without a tested substitute often produces effects that appear only after the original lever is gone. Consider today's debates over algorithms that set prices for essential goods or platforms that moderate online content. In each case, a familiar lever is being removed or restricted. What early, specific signals would show whether the new arrangement is working before pressure forces another blunt correction? And that's where today's story leaves us. If it changed how you see one everyday decision, that's the whole point. Pass it along to someone who'd appreciate it, and we'll be back tomorrow with another case. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at NARA Network. Links in the show notes. This show comes to you from the NARA Network. If you want another sharp daily briefing, Environmental Intelligence has you covered. The Environment and Climate Policy Brief for Canada. All our shows are free at naranetwork.com. New to the network, naranetwork.com/start-here picks the right daily briefing for you in about 2 minutes. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.